So we are live. We're going to talk about Jim Jones. Did he snitch? Report when he got into those two gentlemen. By the way, if you noticed, Jim Jones was using sort of a body lock to hold one gentleman down and the other person that was with the other guy. Well, what did he do? In the process, he tried to hit him with ground and pound shots, but very untrained hands in terms of the way that he was going about throwing hammer fists like he was Bam Bam, right? Not a very successful attack on his part, but what do you expect from most people who are untrained? Now, with Jim Jones, the controversy is not so much of the fighting techniques that he had used or the lack of, but rather one of the most important issues in this particular conversation is regarding the fact that Jim Jones is being alleged to have snitched in this particular instance. And here's the thing. There's a lot of complicated matters into this hand. For one, if you are a person that, let's say, leans into the gangster life, someone who is somewhat of, in the language, in those terms, a non-civilian, right? You operate in a different type of oath, just like police officers, just like law enforcement of all different branches, military, they are all sworn to an oath. Now, why is that important? Because here's something you have to understand. Gangsters are also sworn to a certain oath. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't look at those two things as the same. But honestly, in my humble opinion on that particular matter at hand, I just think that they're not really that far apart, okay? Because here's something you got to understand. One has a particular structure, okay, in terms of leadership hierarchy, if you will, right? That's the reality of the matter. They all have them. Gangs have them, law enforcement has them, military has them. This is a way of life in order to obtain order, especially in a chaotic world that is involved in war and chaos and trying to bring order about in those particular matters. So that's one thing you got to understand. They all have a different oath. What Jim Jones did, in all true to God honesty, is extremely complicated in terms of really pinning it down to one particular box. You see, if you don't like the man, you're already going to paint him in one particular box, okay? And because of that, you're already going to have an inherent bias. But what he did was sort of in that particular oath, if you will, in that part of the world of the gangster life and being a New York blood and things of that nature, I think that there were certain matters that he did violate. But you also have to understand there's also an aspect that he got into a fight with two people at an airport and they were known civilians. That also has to take into account. Also, you got to take into account as well that he gave information as soon as one law enforcement official arrived. And that is where the violation stands for a lot of people. And this is why I got to tell you that it's a complicated matter. And quite frankly, the majority of people in the hip hop community or people that are sworn followers of that particular lifestyle and whatnot, I got to be honest with you, they're not really the sharpest tools in the shed. The majority of them, which means that they're going to take answers and scenarios into one particular box, and they're not going to try to analyze anything in terms of, well, okay, did this guy really go out of his way to try and convict someone, or was he just in the heat of the moment trying to protect himself in what many perceive to be a very racially hot topic issue in terms of being in an airport with a confrontation against two white men? That's the other aspect of it. They want to throw race into that. Again, In all true to God honesty, is there an element to that? Yes. But when it comes to really trying to analyze whether he violated a certain oath or a certain code of conduct, I don't think that race has a particular issue in that particular matter. And that's what I think makes this nuances and a lot of these gray lines very complicated for a lot of people to understand whether he did or he didn't. Here's the thing, in all true to God honesty, if you think that he violated and snitched, I can't blame you for thinking that. But if you also don't think that he did, even though I'm in the opinion of he said a little too much, because you got to understand, in the airport, there are cameras around you, right? The cameras don't lie. And another thing, I got to be honest with you, I got to hand it to those two guys that tried to get into a fight with Jim Jones, because you have to understand, right? In the streets, it's a lot more complicated. You see, you could be the toughest guy in the world. You could be the guy that is the most highly trained, the most highly efficient in terms of unarmed combat. And it would backfire on you if you were to run across somebody that, let's say, had a weapon of some sort, whether it would be a firearm or a knife or maybe even a sword if you really want to take it that far, right? That is the realities of the world, the real world. But when you're in an airport, or let's say you're in a confined space like prison or some other place where you're required to get rid of your firearms before you enter, right? It is a fair ground for unarmed combat. And those two men went and engaged that against Jim Jones. Now, did they know that Jim Jones was Jim Jones, this famous legendary rapper from New York, in particular in Harlem? No. Did they know that this guy was a known blood gang member? No. But here's another nuance to this particular story that I think a lot of people are missing. For one, you got to understand that a lot of people don't like to take into consideration that he did snitch prior to this or had this particular jacket thrown on him. But because of that, it should not be tied to this issue. The issue should be focused on whether he really violated some particular code in the airport in this particular instance. And the answer really is predicated on what you believe or what you don't believe. Now, a lot of people are under the belief that he really did violate a code because you just can't say anything. And quite frankly, there's a part of that that I agree. Let the cameras in the airport speak for themselves, because it's an environment where you're stripped down, because obviously TSA has to take away whatever you have on you, whether it's weapons or etc., things of that nature, right? You're basically in an unarmed environment. And those two men decided to engage that against Jim Jones. And apparently, the one guy, as I was mentioning to you guys earlier, didn't really have the best technique with the way that he was bam bam hammer fisting his way onto Jim Jones while he had a body lock on the other gentleman. I mean, obviously, not the most highly trained individuals, are they? But that's not the main story, and that's not the main point here. But that also goes to show you why people who are interesting, who don't have a combat sports background, usually will sometimes garner the most attention in terms of their fights. That's how Jake Paul and all these other influencers really make a whole lot more money than, let's say, the real actual pros. So take of that as you will. This is the reason why we're also talking about Jim Jones, because of these nuances. I'm going to have a part 2 on that particular subject. I'm going to drop a video on that. And I'm going to have a part 3 to give a final conclusion on Jim Jones, my real opinion, because as part 1 and part 2 and part 3, at the end of it, I'm really going to give you my sworn true opinion on the matter at hand when it comes to Jim Jones and this particular matter at hand of his code of violation and what have you. So, on to the Saudis, right, and what they're doing with the UFC and their new partnership. Apparently, not only are they going to have that Khamzat card where Khamzat is going to headline against Robert Whittaker. right? By the way, the same month that Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler are all fighting, all in that month, right? And Khamzat is in the middle of that because June 1st, you're going to have Islam and Poirier, and then in the middle of June, you're going to have Khamzat versus Robert Whittaker, which is going to take place in Saudi Arabia, and then June 29th, which is going to be International Fight Week. By the way, quite a strange particular time for International Fight Week, considering that International Fight Week usually falls under a July. But obviously, this one is in a late June, so I sort of understand the sentiment of what they're going for. And obviously, every year the calendar switches off to, a different spot on a weekend. And now it just happens to fall on the 29th. So, okay. Nonetheless, as I said in the previous videos, right? May is boxing month, and then we have Usyk and Fury coming out next week. I'm going to do a video on that as well coming up. And then also you have Lomachenko and Kambosos going on this weekend. And then we just had Canelo on May 4th. So after Fury and Usyk, there's not really much for boxing after that. And then June comes around, then you have Islam. And then you have the Saudi card. So the topic at hand here really is the Saudis, right? And the fact that they're going to sponsor a 9/11 card on September coming up. I think, I don't know what to say about that. I don't know if it's coincidence or if it's just tied to, let's say, some sort of symbolic reasoning of what they're doing. And maybe you could point it out to a lot of things. And I can tell you that any opinion that I may have on the matter and any opinion you have on the matter could be wrong or it could be right. And again, it's all speculative nonetheless. But it is interesting that they want to sponsor a Las Vegas card on 9/11. And you got to think, that may rub a lot of people the wrong way. And if it does, well, guess what? It's going to be very hard to do something about it because, you see, the UFC has such a monopoly in MMA that it doesn't matter what they do. Everything they do is MMA. And that's the true to God honesty. Here's something you got to understand. You have to be a hardcore fan in order for you to watch other mixed martial arts organizations. For the majority of people of the world that are not familiar with mixed martial arts or don't train or don't really care about the culture and the insides of that particular world, they don't know anything outside of the UFC. You may know, I may know, there's literally a regional fight show here in the Sacramento area almost every night, almost every weekend. Northern California, Southern California, it is a haven for American mixed martial arts, right? This particular area of the world, right? Which is why I think it's a great idea that I went and did MMA videos and MMA YouTube and whatnot, because obviously it is a space that I could contribute towards. So all these regional fights every night, right? It makes a place really a haven for mixed martial arts and hardcores and people that train and people that you can run across any random places here in California. You can run across a train killer because a lot of people love mixed martial arts in this part of the world. But for the rest of the world, they don't care. It's not the type of culture that they live under. And then also you got to take into consideration, right? What are some of the most common things that people out here in California love to say? They say, let's run that fade. You got a problem? Let's run the fade. It's a run the fade type of state, meaning that a lot of these guys out here, they'll scrap with you. London, England also is that same particular culture. And then most cultures around the world will just basically shoot you up and, gunplay you, and that's it, right? But this particular culture is an MMA culture. So back onto the Saudis and their relationship with the UFC. So I got to tell you, it's a different kind of relationship than they do with boxing. Because in boxing, what they have is they are able to pay off the fighters, the promoters, to work together in order to build these particular shows, right? And so that's why a lot of these fights are easily made, and everybody is happy with the pay that they get because they're able to facilitate that. So as a result, they have a certain control in boxing that they may have very little to do with the UFC. Because here's the thing. The UFC is one of those brands that never deviates from what it does, right? So whenever you complain about, well, why doesn't the UFC have all these spectacle entrances like Pride FC or professional wrestling, WrestleMania, WWE, WCW? Why don't they have these extravagance in that particular matter? Well, the reason being is because they've never deviated from the fact that the letters UFC are synonymous with the other three letters MMA, because you can't have UFC without MMA. And quite frankly, this is the common thing that a lot of casuals will ask you. Hey, dude, do you train UFC? When really it's MMA. And even sometimes that's really inappropriate to ask if, let's say, to be quite honest with you, the majority of people really only train one particular art, right? So it is in that sense even disrespectful, but even that, people synonymize training MMA as, hey, dude, do you do UFC? Again, mind of the casuals, right? And the Saudis know this. So they know that they have this particular power in the world of MMA. But they want influence in MMA, and they know that they can't penetrate the UFC, not even with the type of money that they have. Because you see, even if the particular money that they were going to throw into, let's say, their own independent mixed martial arts league, because the Saudis can very well do that. They don't need the UFC to hold their hand or to do anything like that. Or do they? Because here's the thing. They know that this particular brand is the monopoly. It is what people know. It is the premier league of mixed martial arts. They're not going to try and compete with them. Because if they did, they would be introducing a particular brand, an off-brand, by the way, that is unfamiliar to the world, and quite frankly, also really inconducive to their investment returns. So in other words, if they were to build their own mixed martial arts organization as Saudis, it would not be useful, because there is already a big mixed martial arts league, whereas in boxing, there are only individuals, not leagues. So what did they do? They went out and paid off all these individuals in order for them to build these particular big cards that you are seeing in the world of boxing today. And now with the UFC, all they want to do is just basically stamp their name into it. And I don't mean to say this in a very demeaning way, but understand it like this. It's like doing homework with a group of people in a group project, and 3 people out of the 4 people in the group were the ones working hard, and then that one guy who didn't do anything for the project just came in and said, man, great job, guys. What do you mean, great job? Where were you the whole time? It's sort of one of those types of things. And again, it's not demeaning in any kind of way, because understand this. What the Saudis are going to contribute to the UFC is tourism packages, the same way that you saw them with Abu Dhabi, with Australia. What else? Other big countries are they're going into, such as Singapore. You've seen a few Singapore cards, fight nights, but also the one with Jiri versus Teixeira. All these international events have a tourism component behind it. And with the Saudis, what they're trying to do is virtually the same thing. Why? Because they want to build tourism into their country in ways that they never have before. And here's another thing you guys have to understand from an Islamic perspective. This is literally, if you want to believe it or not, almost within the end times, So in the Hadith, which is a documentary written in terms of every movement that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has made, he said that the end times will not come until the barefooted Bedouin Arabs compete with each other to have the highest buildings. So you look at the Emiratis. What are they trying to do? Compete to have the highest buildings in the Middle East. What are the Saudis doing right now? They want to follow up. They're like, well, where were we a couple of years ago? We have all this money and we're not doing anything with it other than just, I guess, internal economy, right? Spending within their own. Well, now they want to spend for the rest of the world. And then also, there are other speculations on the oil particularly drying out at a particular time frame in the future in which they have to plan other means of financial incentives for everybody else around the world to invest in their country. And what better way than to have Formula One racing, their own soccer league that may rival the Premier League and Bundesliga in Germany and other South American leagues that are popping right now. They may go into boxing, which they literally run right now. Look, in all honesty, the Saudis run boxing right now. All the big boxing fights are happening due to them. So that is something to understand. So with that in mind, are they going to do the same thing with the UFC? We will find out, inshallah. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys in the near future. And don't forget to look out for part 2 of Jim Jones. Did he snitch or not in the airport incident? And also, I will be going over Usyk and Tyson Fury for next particular week. I will drop it this week, give a prediction, and sort of give particular political implications on that fight, being that Usyk is tied to the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Very interesting content coming up. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon, inshallah. Oh, and by the way, Juma Mubarak to all you guys, and like and subscribe. I will see you guys soon with another content and more content to